I'm going to read some extracts from my book Eavesdrop. I'm going to start with where the story begins, with the prologue. Bashar al-Jabib wriggled forward into position in the long grass. Everywhere smelled fresh and damp. Perched on the crag among the trees that carpeted the higher slope, he commanded an uninterrupted view of the lake in the valley bottom. Water glinted silver where the first rays of sun reached its mirrored surface. Thin ribbons of mist hung here and there above it like wraiths. Al-Jabib's pulse quickened with excitement. After many months of planning, it was finally time to set things in motion. He smiled to himself. They would be proud of him back home. On the far bank, an angler tied a new fly to his line. After one final inspection, he cast towards the row of willows that edged the water, then slowly drew it back by hand so that the lure glided smoothly across the surface. Al-Jabib reached for his rifle, felt its cold metal against his fingertips. Without taking his eyes off the fisherman, he seated the bipod in the soil to support the muzzle and pushed the stock hard against his shoulder. Shuffling awkwardly until he was aligned with the weapon, he squinted into its telescopic sight. He noticed his nerves didn't flutter. Years ago he would have wet himself doing this. Not now. He adjusted the focus and flicked off the safety catch. The fisherman raised his rod and flicked it forward again, letting the line run through his fingers. The man's face looked content. Al-Jabib could see it clearly as he squeezed the trigger. The bullet entered through the angler's right eye. Blood spattered across the fishing bag that stood on the bank as he toppled backwards, and the rod splashed into the water. In the woods, the gunshot sent a pair of pigeons flapping away through the undergrowth. Staying on his stomach, Al-Jabib shuffled backwards off the small square of tarpaulin he had been lying on. His whole body tingled with exhilaration. It had been a beautifully placed shot. Easy. He retrieved the spent case and did his best to rough up the flattened grass before he wriggled further back into the trees. Only when he was well clear into their cover did he stand and brush himself down. Al-Jabib slid his hand inside his jacket and felt for the locket that hung round his neck. His fingers caressed the polished metal, conjuring the memories, the screams, the falling masonry and choking dust. He shouldn't be wearing it, but it had seemed so appropriate. A fresh chapter of history was going to be written, and it fell to him to prepare the ground. It was his destiny. As he hiked the mile back to his hire car, he tapped a number into the mobile and spoke in Arabic. I'm going to read from the start of chapter 5. It was 9:20 the same morning when Bashar al-Jabib pushed through the double doors into the block of flats. His companion, Khalid Hassan, followed directly behind with the holdall. Navy baseball caps obscured their faces, and their hands were encased in fresh-coloured latex gloves. They climbed to the 3rd floor, where a hint of floor cleaner hung in the air. Someone had placed a pot plant on the windowsill that overlooked the London street. Nice homely touch that, with its vibrant splash of pink. A tingle of excitement ran through him as he reached the landing and unzipped his jacket. Without a word, he took the clipboard from Hassan that Hassan had pulled from the holdall. Hassan's eyes darted between the doors of the 2 flats. This was only the beginning, and the weakling was already showing nerves. Being scared was for women. Al-Jabib stood on the brushed doormat of number 11 and rang the bell. His pulse raced and he could hardly stand still. "Come on, lady, open up to your friendly visitor." He wondered what she'd be like. Hopefully not pretty. An elderly spinster would be good, less wasteful. It could be answered by a man, of course, which would be even better. He lit his lips in anticipation, stood back to ensure the clipboard was clearly visible through the door's spy hole, and tried to look as official as possible. As the door rattled moments later, Al-Jabib fixed a pleasant smile to his face. The door opened without a chain. Simple. No one was suspicious of a daytime visitor with a questionnaire. She was 30-something and very plain, with dull brown eyes and mousy hair that needed a wash. Her white blouse was crumpled and hung loose over the waistband of jeans that had long ago faded at the knees. Al-Jabib smiled when he rammed his shoulder against the opening door, ripping it from her fingers. He let the momentum carry him past her into the flat. Her mouth started to open, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. The silenced Makarov was already in his hand. He fired twice, still moving. 2 holes appeared in her forehead, and the impact flung her body against the wall, horror frozen on her parted lips as she sank to the floor, smearing blood down the wallpaper. He moved to a small hall with 3 doors. The closest one was open, and he went through without breaking his stride. Heart pounding from the adrenaline. It was a kitchen diner. A girl of 3 or 4 was perched at a round table watching cartoons on a portable TV. Breakfast was still out. An open packet of cereal, a pair of empty bowls, a plate, half-eaten toast, a jam jar. The girl twisted in her chair at the noise, and Al-Jabib fired without compunction. The little body whirled towards the television like a discarded toy. Her flailing arms swept a glass to the floor. It shattered beside her. Milk spilled across the linoleum and rapidly mingled with blood. Gun levelled, he checked the small lounge through an arch to the right. Children's playthings were scattered across the threadbare carpet, but it was otherwise empty. Hassan came up behind him. "There's no one else," he said in Arabic. Al-Jabib nodded and dropped the gun loosely into his jacket's inside pocket, which had been modified for the silent weapon. He walked back into the dining room. Shame about the little girl, but it couldn't be helped. Al-Jabib stood close to the net curtains. He didn't disturb them, just peered down at the street. The traffic was light, and the glass muffled the rumble of the few cars and an occasional delivery van. The angle to the opposite pavement was gentle and without obstruction. There were no trees, and the double yellows that stretched down either side of the road kept it clear of parked vehicles. It was one of the reasons he had picked this spot. The holdall stood open on the table between the 2 men, inviting. Al-Jabib lifted out a handheld radio and switched it on, put the fist mic to his mouth and spoke in Arabic. "Leader to Outpost 1, base secure, move to position." A slight distorted voice came back in the same language. "On my way." He thumbed the transmit key again. "Leader to Outpost 2, go to position." "On my way." Al-Jabib balanced the radio on the windowsill. Excitement still tingled within him. It was really happening. It was he who was turning all the planning and talk into reality. He straightened his back, like a soldier should, and turned to Hassan. "Let's get ready." I'm going to read the first section from chapter 22, and Ellis is one of the smugglers. Ellis spun the wheel of the van and careered around the next bend. His mobile phone headset was still in one ear, but he had heard nothing since the last instruction to change route. He marvelled again at how Burrows seemed to know so much about customs movements. Once his trip was over, he had decided to make it his business to learn how Burrows did it. Suddenly he caught sight of something silver in the road. He saw it in a blur when the last of the daylight glinted on the metal. Beyond it, fluorescent barriers blocked the road, and he got the impression of someone trying to flag him down. Ellis stamped his foot on the brake, yanked the wheel violently to one side, tried to steer round the ladder of spikes that were barely feet away. Mud and debris splattered across the window where the van slewed sideways. The road was narrower here, with hedges on either side but no high verge. For a split second he thought about stopping. There was nothing illegal on board, but he had to meet that boat. Burrows had made it clear it wouldn't wait long. Ellis spun the wheel back, felt the tyres grip and rammed his foot hard on the accelerator. There was only one way out, and he ploughed into the hedge at full speed. Glass shattered when thick stems smashed the headlights. The front bumper was wrenched from its mountings with a screech of buckling metal. The bonnet concertinaed and partly blocked his view. He threw the van into second gear, setting its engine screaming as he smashed through the mix of bush and thorns. The impact threw Ellis sideways. His shoulder slammed into the window before he was tossed back again when the van lifted, started to topple. Twisting metal screamed when a trunk tore at the front wing. Boughs, stems, branches flashed past the windshield, and the van slammed down onto a mix of soil and root. Mud and weeds were churned into the air, flying up around him. Something hanging loose banged and rattled against the side door when the van bounced through tall grass. Miraculously, the vehicle responded to a twist of the steering wheel, and suddenly the field stretched before him when he careered across its rutted surface. A continuous hedgerow bordered the track immediately to his left. It took a second to regain his orientation, to realise he was now driving parallel to the road. He kept the accelerator rammed to the floor. Up yours, you pommied drongos. A wire fence loomed in front of him, and he smashed into it. Wooden posts splintered and spun into the air around him. Strands of barbed wire snagged on the bodywork, then tore away when he crashed into the next field. It felt as if the whole vehicle was being shaken to bits. He had to get back to the road. A closed gate loomed up on his left. He fought the wheel, sending the vehicle lurching drunkenly towards the gate. Alice braced himself for the crash. It hit square in the centre. The bottom crossbeam splintered. An upright was ripped from the ground. Bits of wood flew around him and clattered along the roof. Metal screamed as it was torn from the wheel arch. Cracks fought across the windscreen with a deafening bang. The van seemed to hang in the air for a second, then hammered into the hard road. Alice was thrown forward. The seatbelt took the full force of the shock, and there was a sickening crack when two ribs snapped under the impact. Pain burned in his chest. The van smashed into the verge on the other side and was tossed back. The van spun into the hedge, flinging Ellis against the door. He felt like a pinball, kicked from bar to bar. Everything blurred, and he tasted blood in his mouth. The engine stalled. There was silence, and everything went still. For a few seconds, Ellis was dazed. He shook himself, and with a grimace of pain once more twisted the key. The van lurched forward. Something clanked against the bodywork, but at least he was back on tarmac. The steering was loose, hardly a surprise, and the wheel moved sloppily in his hand. Ahead was a fork, and he tried to steer left. The vehicle didn't respond. Pain stabbed through his ribs as he hauled on the wheel, his heart pounding. He had suffered worse before. The van shuddered into a slow turn towards the new road, and he entered the woods. Massive Scots pines blocked out the sky. One tyre at least was shredded, and the wheel ran on its rim with a high-pitched squeal. He pushed down harder on the pedal, but the van only seemed to slow more. Steam billowed against the cracked windshield. It could take him no further. Alice swung off the road between two neat rows of Forestry Commission trees. He drove as far as he could before a fallen pine blocked his path. What remained of the front bumper lodged against it, and the engine stalled for the last time. He yanked open the glove box and grabbed the 9mm Glock before reaching for the door. It didn't open. He pushed his shoulder against it and almost cried out from the pain that flared in his chest. This was going to hurt, but his pursuers would be on him in minutes. He twisted to get both legs on the seat beside him, gritted his teeth, and hammered both feet into the door. He was almost sick from the pain that tore through him, but the door flew open with a squeal of metal. Clutching his ribs, he climbed out and leaned against the van. Eyes closed as he waited for the wave of nausea to pass. He wasn't going to let Burrows down now, not after everything. The smell of pine needles and damp soil filled his nostrils as he started to walk. Every step sent a spasm of pain across his chest, and he folded his arms tightly across himself, gripping his sides. It would have been sensible to torch the van, eradicate everything that could identify him, but there was no time for that. Besides, the smoke would only draw his pursuers to him faster. With a map in one hand, he limped through the trees in the direction of the marina.